My first real job, as I called it, was as an event rider and working with Thoroughbreds. We had a small yard of 8 horses, and Janny and Christopher Taylor, who I worked for, had a wonderful way of buying Thoroughbred horses. We always used to go to Ascot sales, so I was very much involved in those days with going to the sales. It was one of the highlights of my life, going to the sales. It was such fun. We'd set off early in the morning and go up the endless lines of these horses. Some were being sold back into racing, and in our case, we were looking for future event horses. I am talking 40 years ago. So, you would easily pick up nice Thoroughbreds for hundreds of pounds, £400, £500, £600, and we would bring them home and retrain them. And many horses from this small yard of 8 horses went on to be, in fact, 2 horses went on to be Olympic level event horses, one for Ireland, one for the United States. Princess Anne herself had a very famous event horse called Todd that also came from our yard there, that was produced by Janny and Christopher and myself. And then a show hack also that went on to be Hack of the Year. So although mostly of course I am connected with Warm Bloods now, my future is probably with them, but the beginnings was very much with the Thoroughbred. I think, again, one of the misconceptions about Thoroughbred horses is that they can't be good at dressage. They really can. I mean, there were some wonderful movers. And in fact, anybody who trains horses, they will also know how easy it is to change a trot into something a little bit more fabulous than perhaps what you start with. So it's not necessary that you would look at a Thoroughbred and think that trot isn't good enough, because trot, as far as I'm concerned, as a dressage rider, is one of the easiest paces to train. So that is something that, in fact, you should not be looking for if you want a Thoroughbred horse to do dressage or eventing. They generally have these great walks, great canters. I always say to dressage riders when I'm teaching them, especially when they're practicing walk, why don't you picture in your head what a Thoroughbred horse looks like walking around the paddock at a racetrack? Because they have these wonderful, great big over tracks, and they march. They have a purpose. They're positive. And that sometimes really helps, like people who dawdle around in their walk, to think about this Thoroughbred, walking around a paddock before a race. Interestingly, with this Aftercare program, a lot of horses can come from the track to the dressage world. One of my very first influential figures as a young dressage rider was Chris Bartle, and I know that Wiley Trout, one of the most successful dressage horses of our time, who was 5th at the Olympic Games, had in fact been a point-to-point horse. So this is a classic example here of where the Thoroughbred really came into his own. I think more, from what I remember that Chris used to say, was the energy that the horse had from being a Thoroughbred. The energy, because being a dressage horse is not just a horse that's not good enough at another discipline. It's no good at jumping, I know, we'll do dressage. It still has to have energy and the will to do the job. So that was my first vision of a very successful dressage horse as a Thoroughbred. And in my time of starting, there was also Jenny Lauriston Clark on a horse called Dutch Gold, always with another horse with a great big Thoroughbred influence him. Diana Mason, who was also on the team, Thoroughbred horse called Prince Consort. And my former neighbour, who sadly passed last year, Trish Gardner, who also had a wonderful horse called Wiley Imp, again, Thoroughbred. So for me, this is not unusual to be able to talk about them being dressage horses. I have, in fact, taught over my period of time some riders who have already received horses for aftercare training. And I can tell you now, they're not all wild, crazy horses that you might expect, because they've been racing. That influence of racing has also helped them see the world. They're used to being around large crowds. They've traveled a lot. And, so generally, actually, they're probably a little bit bored coming to do dressage. They're not going to be wild and crazy because they've had this amazing, for a lot of them, this big wild atmospheres of races and the noise and the pump. And so they actually, I think a lot of them very quickly become suitable temperaments to be able to do dressage at whatever level. As a trainer of riders with different types of horses, some thoroughbreds, warm bloods, I mean, naturally, we would understand, that the dressage horses are very big, loose movers. And, that can be very impressive in a dressage arena with the scope that they have. In their trots and canters, they're naturally more uphill. So, my approach to horses that are naturally uphill, of course, it's just a matter of strength, training, that they learn to stay on their hind legs. Thoroughbreds naturally are a little more horizontal. And because of the fact they were born to run, they tend to have a longer hind leg than front leg. So you're already starting a little bit there, not with all cases, because of course conformations are different with all types of horses. But for a thoroughbred, it's the actual ability to sit. So very much in the training in the beginning, it's about small transitions, teaching them how to carry their weight on their hind leg rather than pull themselves from the front, because they gallop, they push and they pull from their front. So it really is trying to find exercises in the early days that just help them get shorter and smaller and learn to have the collection that will be needed at later levels. Suppleness, of course, like with a natural warm blood, they can be very loose and very floppy because that's how their movement is. A thoroughbred, you have to train the suppleness. They can be a lot tighter, and obviously again with this active brain, it's about relaxation to get them to use their bodies. I think it's really interesting to hear this concept about the Thoroughbred Aftercare program that David Howden is supporting so brilliantly, because I think all of us involved in horse sports, whatever discipline you're in, it's nice to be able to add to a program like this, to be able to help, to be able to offer aftercare. Their careers, as we know, thoroughbreds in racing particularly, will be a lot shorter than eventing or dressage or show jumping horses. But they can still go on to be very successful in these disciplines. So it's all of our job as riders to try and be able to help, to try and be able to look for homes and to try and place these horses so that they can go on and have wonderful careers before retirement.